This is in the interest of posterity. Today is Wednesday, October 6th, Rosh Chodesh, Mar Cheshvan, Wednesday afternoon. Thank you.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank Judy Leibowitz for dedicating this week's shiurim L'Zeicha Nishmas, her son Ephraim Moss, whose yortzeit is this week, and I thank her for the dedication, and the neshama should have an aliyah, and we should all have the schus to learn on his behalf and in his memory. As announced, we're going to deal with Hilchos Kriat Shma, at least at the beginning. From there, we'll segue. If you recall, before we started Hilchos Shemitah and before we started Hilchos Yomim Noraim, we were studying Hilchos Brachos and Psukei de Zimra, etc. And now we've reached Hilchos Kriat Shma, or Birchot Kriat Shma, and Hilchos Kriat Shma. And that will be the topic that we're focusing on for the next while. And it's an interesting chapter in halacha, and very practical, because hopefully we all say Kriat Shma at least twice a day. So we'll get to it. Upon the conclusion of Psukei de Zimra, one really commences the central portion of Shachris. Central portion of Shachris. I know I have an. Okay.
Just bear with me one moment. I'm sorry.
The central portion of Shachar, Kriat Shma, which we all recognize, and when I say Kriat Shma, I'm actually referring to the three different sections of Kriat Shma, unless I pointed out otherwise. Which the first one is taken from Parshas V'Eschanan, Perek Vav. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. We all know the Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuso Le'olam V'Ed, which we'll deal with at a later time, is not part of Parshas Kriat Shma. It was added. I added as an interim thing to say, and when we say it, as you all know, we only say it silently, except on Yom Kippur, when we are Domel Malachim, and we say it out loud. And then the first parsha is V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha v'modecha v'yu advarim ha'ila asher anochi mitzavcha hayom al levanecha. Right? V'shinanton levanecha. You have to teach it to your children. V'dibartam b'am, and you have to learn twice daily. V'shivtecha b'veisecha uvelechtecha v'derech. And here's the twice: uveshafcha ukumecha. When you lie down and when you get up. And this is the mitzvah of Tefillot. Which is the mitzvah of mezuzah. Okay, so the Gemara in Brachos understands, and Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph understands this parsha that I just read to be Kriat Shma, and I say that for a reason, because we'll see that there's a daya in the Rishonim that seems to say, no, it's not. That's not really necessarily Kriat Shma in connection with something else. Understands this parsha to be Kriat Shma, which is to be recited twice daily. B'shafcha uvekumecha. So I want to deal with two issues. One is the obligation to recite Kriat Shma, and however we will define Kriat Shma, a mitzvah d'oraisa, or is it a mitzvah d'rabbanan? And two, if it is a d'oraisa, are all three paragraphs which we know as Kriat Shma, are they all mitzvot d'oraisa, or is only one portion of it, or two portions of it, the mitzvah d'oraisa, and everything else is a mitzvah d'rabbanan? In discussing the question, question number one is the obligation to recite Kriat Kriya Shma, right? The Gemara in Brachas Daf Aleph only discusses the issue indirectly. And the Gemara says the following. Omer Rav Yehuda. This is Daf Chafal from an Aleph. Kriya Shma, Safek Lo Kora, Eno Chose V'Kore. Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is, let's say I'm the Supak. I don't remember whether I said Kriya Shma or I didn't say Kriya Shma. Okay? Day has gone by, and let's say it's nighttime, and I don't remember, did I say Kriya Shma at night? Do I have to repeat it? Okay? Then the Gemara goes on and says, and Rabbi Yehuda says, no, I don't. Safek lo amar. I don't have to go back. My time. What's the reason? Says the Gemara, according to Rabbi Yehuda, Kriya Shma d'Rabban. Saying Kriya Shma is a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, and the klal is, the postulate is, Safek d'Rabbanan is lahakel. For instance, if I don't remember whether I made a bracha or I didn't make a bracha, brachas are d'Rabbanan except for certain brachas like the brachas of Birchas Hamazon, or the first two brachas. So the brachas of the Rabban. If I don't know whether I said the bracha or I didn't say the bracha, it's lahakel. I don't have to go back and repeat it. Now, of course, there are all sorts of ways around this. For instance, if you don't recall whether or not you made a bracha on something, and you're concerned you didn't make the bracha, so what do? So you go to somebody who hasn't made the bracha, you tell them to have you in mind, and you say Yomei. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about the parsha of Kriya Shma. And Rabbi Yehuda says, I don't have to. Meisiv Rabbi Yosef. How can you say, says Rabbi Yosef to Rabbi Yehuda, that it's a Safek d'Rabbanan? Uveshafka uvekumecha. Says the parsha, you have to say it twice. It's a parsha in the Torah, so of course it's a deraisa. Amalei Abaye Hahu b'divrei soreksiv. Says Abaye, no, you misunderstand what it means. What it means is I have to say a Dvar Torah twice a day. I have to say something from the Torah, and I have to say it twice a day. I have to say it b'shafcha at night, uvekumecha. But it doesn't have to be this parsha, okay? The Gemara does not state, 1 second, and then later on in the Gemara, Rebbe Elazar says the following. V'Rebbe Elazar amar, safek kora kriya shma, safek lo kora. Same question. He doesn't remember, a person doesn't remember whether he said Kriya Shma, he didn't say Kriya Shma. Says Rebbe Elazar, Paskins Rebbe Elazar, Chose v'korei Kriya Shma. He's got to go back and say it. So the inference from what Rebbe Elazar says is Safek d'Oraisa is l'chumra, and so Kriya Shma must be a d'Oraisa. But the Rishonim point out that there's a problem with Rebbe Elazar. Let's go back. When we spoke about Rabbi Yehuda, what did we say? He answered, Kriya Shma d'Rabbanan, right? And Safek d'Rabbanan, and from that we understood that Safek d'Rabbanan is Lakula. When we get to Rebbe Elazar, the Gemara doesn't say, however, all it says is Safek Kor Rebbe Elazar Amar, Safek Kora Kriya Shma, Safek Lo Kora, Chose v'Korei Kriya Shma. He doesn't say, what are you talking about? It's a mitzvah d'oraisa. In other words, Abaye says, b'shachma v'kumecha, it appears to be a d'oraisa. And in response, Rebbe Elazar doesn't say it's a safek d'oraisa, and therefore you have to repeat it. He just says, chose v'korei. Okay? The failure to cite a reason for Rebbe Elazar's opinion could be attributable to two possible reasons. One, as we said, Safek d'Oraisa is l'chumra, and therefore one has to repeat Shema if he has a Safek whether he said it or not. Or two, he may agree with Rabbi Yehuda that the mitzvah of Kriya Shema is a D'Rabbanan, it is not a Doraisa, but nevertheless, he rules that in the case of doubt, it should be repeated. Why is that? That is because of the importance of Kabbalah's Ol Malchus Shemayim. What does Kriya Shema say? Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. We accept God as the unitary God, etc. That's Kabbalah's Ol Malchus Shemayim. And even though that it's the Rabbanan, some Rishonim want to say, Rebbe Loza says, because it's such an important postulate, it's such an important thing, so even though it's the Rabbanan, and generally Sofek the Rabbanan is Lekula, in this instance, we make an exception, and Sofek the Rabbanan, we repeat, is L'chumra. Most Rishonim believe, the Rebbe Loza believes that the mitzvah of Kriya Shema is a mitzvah d'oraisa. And therefore, in the case of Sofek, it should be repeated. But, for instance, the Tosas Harash holds that Rabbi Elazar also believes that the mitzvah of Kriya Shema is a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. But since it is a form, as I said, of Kabbalah's Ol Malchus Shemayim, one has to be more stringent about saying it. And therefore, in the case of Sofek, one should repeat it. On the other side of the coin are the Talmidei Rabbeinu Yonah, right? This side of the coin says that both Rabbi Yehuda and Rebbe Loza agree, at least according to the Tosas Harash, that the mitzvah is a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. What they disagree about is this such an important mitzvah d'Rabbanan that I make an exception, and Safek Korah, Safek Lo Korah, I don't know whether I said it, I didn't say it, so I repeat. On the other side of the coin, the Talmidei Rabbeinu Yonah explained that both Rabbi Yehuda and Rebbe Loza, even Rabbi Yehuda, who says Safek Korah, Safek Lo Korah, Eino Choser, he doesn't repeat it, that the mitzvah of Kriya Shema, according to both of them, is midoraisa, but disagree about what it is. Okay, what does that mean? According to Rabbi Yehuda, he believes that Kriya Shema need not necessarily be fulfilled, what I said before, by what we know as Kriya Shema. In other words, we have defined Kriya Shema, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu, V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha, etc., etc. We'll get to the other two paragraphs. And say the Talmidei of Rabbeinu Yonah, you know what? It's a mitzvah d'oraisa according to both, but Rabbi Yehuda has a different definition of what Kriya Shema is, okay? But rather, it may be fulfilled, why? By reciting any Torah portion, right? How does he understand that? So if you go to the Pasha, it says, V'hayu hadvarim ha'ela. What is the Devarim ha'ela? So according to the Talmidei Rabbeinu Yonah, hadvarim ha'ela in this context is Divrei Torah. It's not Kriya Shema. It's not what we know as Kriya Shema. It's not V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha b'chol avavcha, etc. It's whatever I recite. So in other words, I have an obligation before I go to sleep and an obligation when I get up in the morning to say Divrei Torah or to learn something is Divrei Torah. But it doesn't necessarily have to be this, right? Whereas, according to the Talmidei Rabbeinu Yonah, Rebbe Loza holds that it is dafka these paragraphs. That is what Kriya Shema is. So the machlokas is not whether Kriya Shema is d'oraisa. The machlokas is the definition of Kriya Shema. Okay. The majority opinion of most Rishonim is that Kriya Shema is a mitzvah d'oraisa. Okay. But that doesn't answer the question of how we define Kriya Shema. In other words, how did we arrive at the notion that there were 3 paragraphs in Kriya Shema? Shema Yisrael V'ahavta is paragraph 1, right? Because even though in the Siddur, there's Baruch Shem Kvod Malchuso, Olam V'ed, to separate Shema and V'ahavta, in the Torah, they follow one another. The second parsha comes from Devarim Yud Aleph, and that's for Haya Im Shamoa, right? Tishmua Mitzvasai, etc. And the third parsha is Tzitzis. Okay, so the Mishnah. One second, I just have to find my Mishnah here. Just give me a second. 1 second. The Mishnah says the following. The Mishnah in Bracha says the following. 1 second. Omer Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, Lama Kodma Shma V'Haya Im Shamoa. That's why, according to Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha asked, why did we make the sequence Shema Yisrael v'Ahavta, then v'Haya Yishua, Ela Kedei sheyikaber olav all Malchus Shamayim Tchila, because we want to accept the kingship of God first. V'achar kach yikaber olav all mitzvos, then v'Haya im Shamoa El Mitzvosai, etc. Then I accept all the mitzvahs. First, I accept God as God. Then I accept his mitzvahs, right? And Vayomer, Levayomer, Shvahaya im Shoah Noaheg Bayomu Valayla. Why does Vahaya im Shamoa come first, come before the mitzvah or the parsha of Tzitzis? Why? Because Tzitzis is not Noheg Balayla, right? You're not obligated to wear Tzitzis at night. Vayomer Eino Noheg Ela Bayom. So in the pecking order, first it's all Malchus Shamayim, then it is mitzvahs, which is Vahaya im Shamoa, all of which happens day and night, and then, right, comes sort of in the third role, the mitzvah of tzitzis, which is only noheg during the day and not at night, okay? So that's how the Mishnah explains it. Now, if that's the case, right, and there's a pecking order, is all of Kriya Shma considered a mitzvah d'oraisa or just portions? Okay, many Rishonim hold that only the pasuk of Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad is d'oraisa. Their proof is a Gemara in Brachas Daf Yud Gimel that says that Shema Yisrael was the Kriya Shema. In other words, it defines Shema Yisrael as the Kriya Shema of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. That's what he said is Shema Yisrael. For this reason, claims the Magen Avraham in Shulchan Aruch, that the Mechaber in Hilchos Kriya Shema says you have to have particular intent to be Mekayim the mitzvah with regard to the pasuk of Kriya Shema, right? And that's why, and you have to concentrate on that pasuk, but he doesn't say it about the balance, because that encapsulates the essence of Kabbalah's Ol Malchus Shamayim, which V'ahavta and the rest doesn't, and therefore the mitzvah d'oraisa is the first pasuk. Other Rishonim, including Rashi and the Uraim, as I said to you, as I told you in the past, the Uraim, the Sefer Uraim was written by Rabbi Eliezer Metz, who was a Talmud of the Marami Rutenberg, and he is the source of most Minhagei Ashkenaz, okay? And the Uraim say, that Rashi and the Uraim both say that Shema and the first paragraph, in other words, V'ahavta, which follows Shema Yisrael in the Chumash, are midoraisa, based on the following Gemara and Brachas. What does the Gemara and Brachas on Daf Tesayin Omer Aleph say? The Gemara and Brachas says the following. Let's say I'm a workman, and I'm working for my boss, and I started to work early in the morning, before Zman Kriya Shema, okay? I had said Kriya Shema at night, and I start to work. Or I came to work, and I didn't have time to daven. Or I came to work, and I'm up in a tree, okay? And the time for Zman Kriya Shema, right? Jay every week puts on the Shabbos notice when Zman Kriya Shema is. In other words, that's the optimal time to fulfill the mitzvah. And he's involved in work. And for him to stop work, for lack of a better term, he'll be cheating his boss because he's davening and he's not working. So what does the Gemara say? So the Gemara in Baruch says that if he's in the middle of his workday, when the time to say Kriya Shema comes around, since he's working, he only needs to say the first paragraph. He only has to say Shema Yisrael V'ahavta. Both Rashi and the Uraim say, from here, there's a proof that that's what's Doraisa. In other words, he has to say the minimal Doraisa, and he says Shema and V'ahavta, and with that he is Yotze. The Pri Chodesh on the Shulchan Aruch maintains that the first two paragraphs, in other words, V'ahavta, Shema Yisrael V'ahavta, and V'hoya im Shemoa are Doraisa. Now the Rambam in Hilchos Kriya Shema has a whole arichos here. One second, just let me get. I'm not in Jerusalem, so I don't have all my sperm. I'm going between my computer and my tablet. Okay, the Rambam says the following in the first halacha in Hilchos Kriya Shema: Pamayim b'chol yom korim Kriya Shema. Twice daily, you have to say Kriya Shema. Be'erev uvaboker shene'ema. Pasuk we know uv'shafchecha uvkumecha. What does that mean? Says the Rambam. B'shah shederech b'nei adam shokvin b'zehu layla. You have to say it b'shafchecha when most people are sleeping, which is night. Uv'shah shederech b'nei adam omdim b'zehu yom. And when people get up, and when is that generally? In the morning. Umahu koreh, says the Rambam. Ask the Rambam. Okay, what is he supposed to recite to be Yotze the mitzvah Kriya Shema? And he gives the following answer. Elohim, Shema, the parsha of Shema and V'ahavta. V'haya im Shemoa, number 2. And then Vayoma, the parsha of Tzitzis. Okay? Umakdimin, here's the order, the Rambam's order, which is the same. Umakdimin likros pasha Shema. And we say Shema and V'ahavta first. Because that's Kabbalas Ol Malchus Shemayim, and we say that God is one, etc. V'avasa, V'ahavta, V'salmudo, Shehu ha'ikar, right? V'dibarta bam, and we mentioned Torah, right? Shehu ha'ikar ha'gadosh ha'kol toli. All of Yadu, says the Rambam, is dependent on those three things. Okay? V'achareha, the next paragraph, V'haya im Shemoa, you say the parsha of V'haya im Shemoa, sheyesh bo tzivui al zechirat kol ha'mitzvot, right? V'haya im Shemoa tishmu al mitzvosai. With that paragraph, we remember, first paragraph, we remember who God is, we remember his Torah, and in the second paragraph, we remember all the mitzvos. V'achakach Parshas Tzitzis, Vayom Hashem, right? Daber b'nei Zor ma'atalem fasulam tzitzis. Noheges balayla, korino so balayla. But the Rambam understands the problem, right, of saying the parsha of Tzitzis at night, right? He says you have to say it twice. You have to say all three paragraphs. The parsha of Tzitzis is not Noheg balayla, but he gives a reason. Why do you say it? At night, the third paragraph, the parsha of Tzitzis, switches meaning, because I'm not mechuyev to wear tzitzis. So if I'm not mechuyev, how can it be a doraisa? So says the Rambam, there's a twofold purpose in reciting the mitzvah, the parsha of tzitzis. One is because tzitzis reminds us also of all the mitzvos, but number 2 is because the pasuk in that parsha says "Aman Tizkuru," as Yom says, right? The "Aman Tizkuru," you have to remember that you left Mitzrayim. And the pasuk in Devarim says, "The man tiskor et yom tzeischa me'eretz Mitzrayim kol yemei chayecha." We all know this from the Haggadah. Yemei chayecha yomim kol yemei chayecha other leilos. Ukriya shalosh parshios elo asay dezeh he nikreis kriya Shma. Says the Rambam that these three paragraphs are the definition of kriya Shma. Okay. So we see, according to the Rambam, right, you have to say it twice daily. Then he says you have to say all three paras. However, he explains why the parsha of tzitzis is doraisa, right? And he gives the answer, all right? And we are required to remember all three of those day and night. Okay, so I'll just end with what. So there's a machlokus among the achronim as to what the Rambam, I mean, it seems pretty clear, but what is the Rambam really saying, right? So for instance, the Kesef Mishnah on the Rambam says that according to the Rambam, the only pasuk that is doraisa is the pasuk of Shema Yisrael, right? Right? Doesn't appear that way, but that's what he understands. The Shagas Aryeh insists that the Rambam understands that the first paragraph, Shema Yisrael and V'ahavta, that's what the doraisa, right? And as I said, the Pri Chadash believes, says this in Shulchan Aruch, that the first two paragraphs are part of the doraisa obligation. So the Rav, in one of his Yortzeit shiurs, said the following. He quoted the Rambam that we just read, but he doesn't, right? Remember, how did we answer what? He doesn't cite the mitzvah as a mitzvah to remember Yitzias Mitzrayim, which he, in other words, when he cites the mitzvahs, he doesn't say that there's a mitzvah, he doesn't count as one of the mitzvahs, that there's a mitzvah balayla to remember Yitzias Mitzrayim, okay, in the Sefer HaMitzvot, right? He says it here, but in Sefer HaMitzvot, when he, by the way, this is, how should I say, I've cited other parts of this. This is fertile ground for Brisker Torah, right? You just have to understand how the structure of the Rambam. The Rambam wrote a Sefer which comes together with the Mishnah Torah, which is called Sefer HaMitzvos. In the Sefer HaMitzvos, the Hakdama, the forward to the Sefer HaMitzvos, is 11 ikorim about how the Rambam classifies mitzvos. And then after he tells you how I'm going to classify the mitzvot, he lists them. He lists all the mitzvot aseh, and then he goes on and recites all the mitzvahs lo saseh. Then you get to the Mishnah Torah. And in the Mishnah Torah, you have, the Rambam was very organized. So at the beginning of all the halachas, right, at the beginning of all the halachas, he cites what he's going to cover. In other words, he gives you a very short summary of what he's interested in telling you about in that perek or in those mitzvot. Okay, so he'll say something. He'll say, "Boah, in this paragraph we're going to discuss Hilchos Kriya Shma," and very often he doesn't say something that he says later on. Okay, and not so often, but every once in a while, he discusses a mitzvah that doesn't appear in the Sefer HaMitzvahs. So the Rav says here, okay, he says that as far as he's concerned, the Rambam seems to say all three paragraphs of the Raisa. But he never mentions in his Sefer HaMitzvahs that which he says here is why is Vayomer included? Because there's a mitzvah of Zchiras Mitzrayim at night as well. So he says that his grandfather, Reb Chaim, that the mitzvah of Schiras Yitzias Mitzrayim is not an independent mitzvah. What is it? It's part of Kabbalat Ol Malchus Shemayim. When I accept the Ribbono Shalom, one of the things that I accept about my belief in the Ribbono Shalom is that he is the one who took us out of Egypt. In other words, it's subsumed under that. So therefore, while the essential mitzvah of Kriya Shema is in the first two paragraphs, right? As the Pri Chadash says, okay? But we say the third paragraph to enhance our understanding of what Ol Malchus Shemayim is, okay? So, in effect, since there is, in other words, it's part of the mitzvah of Ol Malchus Shemayim, according to him, all three paragraphs are Doraisa, but they're broken down differently. The first two are straightforward mitzvahs Doraisa, and the third paragraph is subsumed under the first two paragraphs, or under the first paragraph, as part of Kabbalah's Ol Malchus Shemayim. They're all three Doraisa, but they have two different gradations. The first one is Kabbalah's Ol Malchus Shemayim. The second one is Ol Mitzvos. And then the third one modifies or explains to me that part of the mitzvot are, or one of the mitzvos is, the Zechiras Yitzias Mitzrayim in the morning and the afternoon. Okay, we'll quit here and we'll take it up again on Monday in Yitzhak Hashem. Friday, in consultation with the boss, Jay, I'm gonna start to discuss Megillas Esther, because as Jay says, and I got called out for this last time by somebody, it's only, if I'm correct, it's only 24 weeks to Purim.
27. Oh, 24. That's right. It was 27 weeks till Pesach. So I guess we're down to
that in and of itself is a machlokas, because there are some who think that Purim should be in the first Adar, or the two Adars. That's why this. But we'll leave that for another time. But please God, on Monday, Friday, at 9:30, we'll start to discuss Megillas Esther. Have a good evening, everyone.
Feel free to
questions. I'll be happy to take them.
You can unmute yourselves,
Barry,
anyone who wishes.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
I'm jumping on the bandwagon to ask you a straightforward kashrut question.
Kashrut, okay.
This is like this. In Emek Rafaim, there's a shop called Bashar, which sells kosher cheeses. And one of the kosher cheeses is, or one or two of them is brie and camembert. Now, I learned that we don't have to worry about kosher milk because non-kosher milk does not coagulate to make cheese. And therefore, normally, you don't need to worry about that.
Correct.
But this one type of cheese is soft. You can stick your thumb into it. It's very soft. Does that affect that decision?
The answer is, I'm going to tell you two parts to give you two answers. Answer number one is that there are poskim who say that brie and camembert and such cheeses do not require a hashgacha. Cottage cheese doesn't require a hashgacha. That doesn't require a hashgacha. I can tell you that my granddaughter, who spent 2 years in Cyprus at medical school, got a psak that said that on those kinds of cheeses and cottage cheese, she did not require hashgacha. Not everybody agrees with that, but there are certainly, as they say among poskim, yesh al mi lismo. But I want to say something else because you brought up Bashar. I have a lot of questions about the various hashgachas that Bashar has for the following reason. And that is, if you ask to see the kashrus of most of the cheeses, and I'm not talking about the brie and camembert, which have a different issue, there's one Rav who appears on, I don't know how many Tudot kashrut. In addition to which, I once went I was in the Shuk. They have a shop in the Shuk, also Bashar. And I was with somebody who is, shall I say, was not punctilious about kashrus. And there was something in the shop. I asked to see the Tudot, and the person said to me, I don't care what any Tudah says, there is no way that that can be kosher. I forget exactly what the reason was. Oh, it had some sort of wine. I forget what it was. And so therefore, I became somewhat suspect of Bashar. Not about the brie and camembert, that depends who you paskin with. Anyway, that's what I have to say about it.
Thank you very much.
There was
All
a
right.
controversy between Bashir and the rabbinate going on for a couple of years
Correct.
about the and as a result, I won't serve their cheese to certain people who may come to my house because I
Okay.
don't want to get into the machlokas.
Okay, fair enough. We'll leave it at that. Everybody understands what I'm saying.
Thank you very much.
All right, be well, everybody.
Bye.
Good afternoon.